Okay, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to our first live stream Q&A with myself, Emma, and I'm the Undergraduate Admissions and Outreach Officer here at St Hildas College, and with me I have the Tutor for Admissions, Dr. Sarah Norman. So we are here to answer any questions that you might have. Please do pop them in the chat, in the Slido conversation, or you can pop them in the YouTube comments. That's absolutely fine. We'll find them either way. But please do feel free to ask us any questions at all. Um, so, Sarah, I have some questions that have been delivered to us before today. So I thought we'd just kick off with those, and then we'll go back to the questions that are on Slido in a bit.
Okay, that's great. Good morning, everyone.
So, Sarah, is there an advantage or a disadvantage between having an open application or specifying a college?
There's no advantage in terms of chances of getting in. You have a similar chance to get in if you select a college of choice or if you're considered through the open allocation. What tends to happen is if you select a college, your application goes straight to that college, and depending on which subject it is, they will shortlist according to the criteria of that subject. If you make an open application, your application will be sent to a college, and the computers do this based on an algorithm of which colleges need to see that subject, applicants to that subject, and you'll be considered alongside those people that applied directly to that college. And there's no bias as to whether or not you applied directly or if you came through the open application scheme. The big advantage, of course, by selecting a college of choice is that you are more likely to be seen by that college. It doesn't dictate you will be, but you're more likely to be seen by that college. So if you have a preference for a particular college, then I would advise you always to put that preference down.
Great. I also have some questions about St Hildas in particular, and someone's asked how big is St Hildas in terms of the amount of students that we have here and also the college grounds. Is it a big college?
I think we're somewhere in the middle. Some of the colleges only take about 80 students a year, and so proportionally they're much smaller in terms of the numbers of undergraduate students on course. Some colleges take more than us. I believe St Cat's is the biggest college, possibly New College is very large. We take up to 120 students a year, which is probably just above the average. So we're sort of above the average in terms of number of students per year. In terms of our space, physical space, we sit at the bottom of the high street, just before you get to Cowley Road, where the bars and the restaurants are. We're very close to the sports centre. And we're, as you can see in the picture behind Emma, we're spread along the banks of the River Cherwell. In fact, what's really, you can see the green space opposite us. So we're sort of diagonally across from Magdalen College, next to the Cherwell, and our college grounds spread in 4 acres along the length of the Cherwell. And we're oddly directly between this area of green and right next to all these really interesting bits of Oxford to live in. So it's sort of a perfect location. Other colleges are centrally located and some are further away. We have about 4 acres. And then we have a site, sorry, didn't answer your question properly, Emma. We have a site just down Ipley Road opposite the sports centre, which is another block of accommodation, a quad, which we have our finalist students in.
Well, talking about accommodation, here at St Hilda's we don't offer accommodation for the entirety of someone's course, and I think a lot of people get a bit nervous about that. Is that something that people should worry about living outside of St Hilda's College, you know, going out and living down Cowley Road, for example? Is that?
I think it is something that does concern people, and it is a factor that people use when making a decision. I think at the age of 17 it must be quite alarming to think about living out in private accommodation. But there are benefits to that, of course. And so at St Hildas, we guarantee a room for first year. So students don't even have to apply for accommodation. We just allocate them a room. We have two large buildings that have all the first years living in them. And then we have, actually just above me, an area of South Building that also has first years in it. And so they live on inside, just that you can virtually, they can walk down onto that grass behind you. And that's really lovely for first year. In second year, students with welfare needs can also stay in college because we have some ability to house some of the second year. And then for third year and fourth year students, depending on how long the courses are, those students can elect to say which is their preferential year, because then we will be able to house students in what we call their final year. A lot of students stay in on a 4-year course, they might stay in for third year and fourth year. But actually speaking to our students, they really relish the opportunity in living out. It's quite daunting to start with, but actually what you get is a room for the whole, is a house for the whole year. So you actually get to live in Oxford. If you live in student accommodation, especially if you live in a college site, then what you tend to have is a room for 9 weeks. Your parents drive you up, you stay for 9 weeks, then they come and collect you, empty your room, drive you home for Christmas, 6 weeks, and then you come back for the next term and you repeat that. And so you only actually get to stay in Oxford for say 27 weeks in the year. Whereas if you live out, yes, it's more expensive, but you do get accommodation for the entire year, which means you don't have to clear out your room at Christmas, you don't have to clear out your room at Easter, and you get to stay the summer, which is really lovely, because actually living and hanging out in Oxford is really, really pleasant. And it's a shame actually when the students have to go home so early on in the summer. We're in week 10 at the moment, which is at the end of our third term, what we call Trinity term, and students have all had to leave, apart from second year, who are all still enjoying their houses. And like I say, we're very close to Cally Road, which is where a lot of the student accommodation is, the private student accommodation, and they live surrounded by bars and restaurants and quirky little shops, and it's just a really nice vibe down there.
Someone's also asked about financial support and what support the college can give in terms of financial support. And I was just wondering what sort of financial support that we are able to provide for students once they're here.
Okay, so it's worth saying that there's a huge amount of financial support from the university. So if a student's from the UK, then they go through Student Finance England. I think it's very slightly different for Scotland. So you can go to your, as it were, national funding body. The information about your finances then trickles down to the University of Oxford fees and funding team. And if you're on incomes of a certain level, then Oxford University will be able to provide an Oxford bursary, and that's a non-repayable grant. And there's a crank start grant for people on very low income, and then there's a sort of a schedule of different amounts of money according to what family income you do have. So that's what the university provides. What we can provide in college are, for those people on very low incomes, we can provide some bursary support. Now, this isn't guaranteed, and it depends on the donated funds that the college has. We have a very supportive alumni base who are very keen to support our students, and we have what's called the 125, which was named after our 125th anniversary. We're Victorian. We have bursaries where we provide £1,250, just cash, to students each year of their course. And that's for those people on very, very low incomes or family incomes. Then we have some other bursary schemes which we award to students depending on the subjects they're studying and the income that they have. And some of that's detailed on our website. But again, this is not guaranteed funding. This is just according to the funds we have available. And that depends very much on our alumni base, which is, like I say, terribly supportive. That's bursaries. Then we have termly grants that students can apply for. And some subjects are supported better than others. And I'm just going to make a point about modern languages. At St Hildas, we have this incredible fund for modern languages, the J.S. Smith Fund, and basically any modern language student that wants to travel in any of the vacations has access to this incredibly generous fund. So that's just a simple application signed off by a tutor, and I'm chair of the grants committee, and we sit down every term and award funds to students for travel associated with their courses. The last year's been a bit awkward, but normally we would award travel funding to go to conferences, to go to libraries, research in archives. The classics students tend to go to Rome and other places in Greece. Modern linguists go to the countries they need to learn their languages. And then we have funds for extracurricular activities. So we pay for, in my first year, I was astonished by how many sports bras and football boots we bought. But basically, small amounts of money for sports, mostly sports, other activities as well. And then we've got hardship funds. And the hardship funds we've got quite generous hardship funds, but they are restricted to those students who have experienced unexpected and unavoidable hardship. This isn't just people who need a little bit more money for something. It's actually a loss of family income or a catastrophe that's happened to them. So there's all sorts of different levels of support, and we have a very caring versus personal situation. But what we don't do, I don't want to mislead anybody, what we don't do is provide the funds that a student might need to pay for their entire degree. That's just not a feasible option, unfortunately, and wouldn't be for any college.
No, that's very true. So in terms of the students themselves and international students, for example, how many do we admit roughly every year?
So in total, a maximum of 120, although last year, because of the A-level fiasco, I think we started with 122 or 24. About 120 students, of which approximately a quarter are non-UK. So that would be a mixture of European students and overseas international students. And that's the undergraduate body. So in total, that means that we've got about 400 students on course at any one time. And then we do have a graduate population, although this may not be as relevant for this talk, but we take about 80 graduates every year, and we've got about 280 graduates, and they mostly live off-site. They don't have on-site accommodation, although they do have a common room to visit on-site.
And then leaping off on that question, some people get worried about things like quotas and quotas for the amount of international students that we admit every year. And someone's asked, is there a quota on the number of international students from the same country studying the same course?
The shortest answer is no. We don't run quotas for courses. For any course apart from medicine. And the medicine quota is actually set by the government. And I believe there's something like 6% of medics at Oxford can be overseas. But that's for the medicine department to worry about. That's not a college decision. But every other subject that's offered, there's no quotas at all. We could have everybody in that course from the same country or from completely different countries. They could be all overseas, they could all be home. It's not determined by anything like nationality, it's entirely determined on ability and aptitude for the course.
And talking about international students, but moving back to home students, someone's asked, how diverse is St Hildas in terms of state to private school ratio?
This is something that's quite common. So I think over the last 3 years we're about 58 to 60%. Is that right, Emma? I think you've looked at the numbers recently.
I think
I think last year was higher. Last year was an unusual year because of the A-level fiasco. I'll say the same word again. Um, but we let in a great deal more students because the schools were very generous with their grades. So we had an unusually large year, yes, last year. And I think that the overall effect of that was all the colleges found that they took a lot more UK students and a lot more state school students. So about 60%, I think, is about the right answer. It varies a little bit each year. We don't, again, have quotas. We just pick the best students regardless of their background. But we are looking for people who outperform their schools. So it doesn't really matter if you're from one type of school or another. We're looking for ability and a comparison of your ability with your background. So we take into consideration a great deal of different measures that indicate whether or not someone's had an advantageous background, and we always take that information into account.
So someone has asked, is it possible to get an ensuite in first year?
Ah, people do like an ensuite, don't they?
Mm.
We do have quite a lot of ensuite accommodation. It's in buildings that are not normally used by first years. So it tends to be for the finalists and those students who have welfare needs. We do have some disability assisted rooms, some of which are ensuite, but we don't make it generally available to our first year. The majority of the first year are in shared facilities. They're in single bedrooms. No one shares a bedroom, but they do have to share bathrooms and kitchens. Yes.
Can I also just say, I think people get very worried about sharing a bathroom and a kitchen, but it's just a normal part of the university experience, and I think it's a really good, strangely, a very good experience to have. And our facilities here are really lovely, so I wouldn't worry too much about whether you can have an ensuite or not. It's more about the people that you live with and that experience that you have. So yeah, I wouldn't worry about that in the slightest. You'll get used to it very, very quickly, and it's just a really good living experience, I think.
I think actually it's also quite good for community and friendships, in as much as if you didn't know anybody when you came to university and you had an ensuite room and perhaps you even had your own kitchen facilities, your ability to meet people and to keep in touch with people and have that general chit chat day to day is reduced. And although it does seem nice to have private facilities, actually I think it's quite important for people, for their day-to-day contact with other people, for their general mental health support. It's nice to see people. It's nice to have contact. And even if that's just passing someone in the corridor on the way to the bathroom, or, trying to squeeze past them into a kitchen, it's worth seeing what the kitchen facilities are like, because it's very unusual to have ensuite bathrooms. But it's, of course, all colleges will provide kitchen facilities. And I think there are ratios that are worth looking at. So it might be that some colleges have got a corridor of 8 people sharing a kitchen, and some colleges have only got sort of 4 kitchens for their entire first year. So it's definitely worth, if that matters to you, having the ability to self-cater. It is worth seeing what the ratio of kitchens to bedrooms is. If you're not interested in self-catering and you just want to eat in the dining hall, then obviously we'd encourage that, because again, it's very social. It's really lovely to see people and meet up and eat together. And that's something that's been really difficult over the pandemic. And I think people have missed enormously. And I think it's good for people to meet up and be social rather than squirreling themselves away in their own rooms.
Yes, and we do have a lot of squirrels as well.
We could tell you the stories about the squirrels, but we won't. Yeah, you have to be. The squirrels at St Hildas are cheeky.
Actively cheeky, yes.
And they like the first years because the first years feed them.
I have a question about interviews, and someone's asked what is happening with interviews this year. Will they be in person? And also a bit more of a general question, but what should they expect at an interview?
Yeah, so interestingly, we have to make this decision about interviews really early on in the year, and it's great that the decision's been made by the time we got to open days, so that we can tell people interviews are going to be online. They're going to be on Teams, which is the program that Emma and I are talking to each other on at the moment. It's a really robust system, and we ran it last year because we had to, because of the pandemic. It was actually a lot better than a lot of people thought. It's a planned use of it this year. So we will definitely be using Teams online interviews. All of the special programs and facilities that we set up to support it last year in a hurry are ready to use again this year, and we anticipate it will go really smoothly. Students, of course, will potentially be in schools, and the university contacts the schools about applicants and make sure that they have the facilities that are needed to talk to tutors and have their interviews at Oxford. So Oxford's very good at providing the basic equipment that's needed at their end. And I found that it went really well. In fact, Emma, you were amazing setting all the Teams interviews up last year. So we're definitely doing that again. What's interesting is it seemed to be a real leveler. It evened out that some of that, and that's maybe why we have such a diverse first year at the moment, actually, because it advantaged, if that's a good word, those students that were less familiar with Oxford. They didn't actually have to travel here. They didn't have to stay on their own in a college they didn't know. And hang out with people they'd never met before. They actually were at home, they were more relaxed. And some subjects said it was even better than it would normally be. So I don't think it's a problem, but it is online, and it is a shame that people can't visit, because I think that's part of the experience, is actually coming and having a look around the university that you're applying to. So we would encourage people still to visit, and again, unfortunately, we can't accept visitors today. Because of restrictions, but there will be opportunities for people to visit the university over the year.
And what should someone expect at an interview?
A conversation. It's a bit like a mini tutorial. So the teaching method at Oxford is shared with other universities, but it's not hugely common. But essentially, the lectures and the practicals, if you're doing a subject that requires practicals, are in departments, just in town. And those lectures are supported by tutors providing tutorials in the colleges. And instead of being in a group of 120 people in a lecture theatre, you're now sitting in an office with one or two other students. They tend not to be one-to-one in first year. They just tend to be small group. And the tutor will be asking you questions, you'll be giving your opinion, maybe you've done some reading. So it's a conversation between people. At interview, it will be two tutors and one applicant. And they may ask you subject-specific information. If it was maths, they'll probably do an equation and get you to solve it. It could be a problem that they want you to solve. It could just be a conversation about something you've read, or they might give you some information, ask you to read it, and ask you to talk about it. It's appropriate for the subject that you're applying for. And if that's maths, you get a maths question. And they very much want to see how you answer it. They'll want to see what you're thinking, how you're going about it, how do you approach the problem. If it's a more humanities-based subject, where you're asked, or even something like philosophy, where you're discussing a concept or an idea, then they might throw other ideas at you, and they'll see whether or not you can incorporate those ideas, whether or not what you do with that information. So it'll look for flexibility. It will look for, this is a terrible word, teachability. They'll want to know whether or not you'll benefit from that interaction.
And then someone's asked about matriculation, so I thought I'd start with the first question is, what is matriculation? And then the next question is, will matriculation be face-to-face this year?
Okay, oh gosh, I'm not sure that decision to be made. So matriculation is a student being admitted to the university formally. So you have to go through a matriculation ceremony to become a student at the university. And interestingly, you only ever do it once. So if you stay on to do a master's degree or a PhD, then you don't go through matriculation the second time because you've already been admitted here. So it's a formal entry to the university. It's a ceremony to acknowledge that. It's the opposite of graduation, where it's the formal leaving of the university. So it's sort of bookends your career at Oxford. So that's the purpose of it. Whether it's going to be online or in person, I think we're still awaiting government guidance on that. With current restrictions, we can't have groups that size meet. If social distancing restrictions are reduced and nothing changes in terms of the pandemic by October, then I imagine we'll be back to in-person ceremonies.
So a wait and see, unfortunately.
It is. I'm so sorry. There are so many questions I'm sure people have actually about what will it be like. Well, whatever it will be like, we will cope because we've done everything now.
Yes.
We can do in-person teaching. We can do, as it were, what's expected as normal. But we can also do, with restrictions. We can teach with restrictions. We've got all of the systems set up. And St Hildas, as a college, was a college that stayed open during the pandemic. We did not close our site. We did not send all our students home. We looked after our international students who couldn't go home, and we looked after the students with valid welfare reasons for not going home. And they were housed all year round. We stayed open over Christmas and New Year, and we looked after our students, which was, I think, appreciated at the time. And we've gone back to in-person teaching as quickly as we could. But that in-person small group teaching, as long as we're following the guidance, can occur safely. We've had no transmission within the teaching environment.
So Sarah, we're coming to the end of our session, so I have one final question for you, which is, what differentiates St Hildas from other colleges at Oxford?
Ooh, now that's quite a good question because it's one that people ask quite a lot, and it's a really tricky one to answer actually, because there are some really silly answers, but actually some people see that as less silly than I do. So we're a relatively young college, so we're Victorian rather than medieval. We had a history of being a female-only college, which we've been mixed since 2008, and we went 50% mixed immediately. What that's left behind, though, is a very supportive ethos and one of equality, because we were set up to provide an education for women, and that equal rights to an education has continued. So the tutors that are here are very supportive of their students. They enable their students to do as well as they can. And I believe we're just a little bit more, everybody says they're a friendly college, but I think the students report that they find St Hildas more relaxed, more supportive. We have this incredible open ground that you can see behind Emma. It is a very open site, and I think that reflects our attitude. We aren't closed in and dark and dismal. We're very open, and we have lovely grounds you can walk around. We don't have the strict formality of some colleges. We have round tables, so people get to speak to each other in a more sort of small group way. And I just think the staff here are really friendly and nice to the students. We do our best to help people achieve what they want to achieve.
Yeah,
it's the ethos, I think, that makes the big difference. But actually, if you ask the staff, they say it's the people, and if you ask the students, they say it's the food.
Brilliant. Sarah, thank you so much. I hope that helped answer some questions about St Hilda's for anybody who's watching. Please do tune in later on this afternoon at 2 o'clock. We have another live stream with our current students. So please do pop along. Please, feel free to ask some questions on Slido or on YouTube, and we'll be very happy to answer them. So until then, thank you very much, and I hope you have a lovely rest of your morning and a lovely rest of your day.
Thank you, Eva, and goodbye, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it. Bye-bye.